Here we've seen something, I've seen something, hundreds of pilots have seen something in the skies. We have dutifully reported these things. And we have to have 15 million witnesses before anybody's going to look into the problem seriously? Why, this is utterly fantastic. This is more fantastic than flying saucers or people from Venus or anything, as far as I'm concerned.
Pilots know now that you can make reports all day long and nothing will be done about it. Nothing will be investigated. They'll take your report and they lose it immediately. Military pilots have made reports many times. They've chased them. They have been set out to chase it, to find out what they are. They come back with reports, and that's as far as it ever goes.
Airline pilots with thousands of hours' experience have reported saucers coming within a few hundred feet of their planes, matching speed briefly, and then darting off at supersonic speed, leaving a glowing exhaust trail. Student pilot Arthur Weisberger reports on his experience.
My name is Arthur Weisberger. On July 21st in Tucson, Arizona, while out in my backyard, 3 shiny objects in the sky attracted my attention. I glanced up and there were 3 flying saucers in a V, approximately a half a mile away from me at an altitude of 350 feet. They appear to be hovering in midair with what I believe to be a spinning action. The saucers stayed still for approximately 40 seconds and then took off due north horizontally. From a dead stop, these saucers exceeded a rate of 500 miles an hour for approximately 5 seconds, still going horizontally due north towards the Santa Catalina Mountains. At the end of 5 seconds, they went at approximately 45 degrees straight, up. They exceeded 1,000 miles an hour until they vanished from sight. They appeared to be 50 feet in diameter, with what appeared to be a dome on the top with, I can't be sure, but I believe I saw the sun glinting off of, windows or observation portholes of sort.
Well, very conveniently, Captain, we've got a nice blackboard here. Do you think you could illustrate this phenomenon for us? Could you show us what it looked like, very roughly?
I'll try. When I look out of the left-hand window of the nose of a Stratocruiser, I see something like this. Well, that is the port wing. One of the engines is there. And on this occasion, the horizon was at about that level, with low clouds way beneath us. The sun had just set over here, and these objects appeared something like this. The large object appeared at times to be something like that, with the smaller objects in relation to it something like this. They were sometimes ahead of it, sometimes behind, and the shape of this object was continually changing. Sometimes one end would appear to disappear, sometimes this was very much larger, sometimes it was almost a V-shaped affair like this. It was always black in silhouette and always quite a clear edge to it.
And when it finally disappeared, it seemed to dissolve.
Yes, the smaller ones just disappeared first, and this just shrunk down until it was no more than just a speck, and then even that disappeared.
Now, would you say that it's possible some sort of optical illusion, or would you say it was an intelligently navigated craft?
And last Tuesday, when we were flying in a Vampire night fighter over Kent and at 20,000 feet, and I first sighted this object. The first sighting was of a tiny pinpoint of bright light. My first impression was that it was a star shining through the overcast, and I looked around to see if there were any more stars, but obviously there weren't. And I continued watching this thing, and for about 15 to 20 seconds, it remained stationary, neither moving left or right. After this time, the thing obviously was moving towards us, and before it reached the overhead position, I nudged my navigator, flying off the Smythe, to have a look up. By the time it got to the overhead position, it appeared to be moving at quite a fast, fantastic speed, and my impression of it, more or less a photographic impression, was of a round object, quite distinct outline, still with the same intense light, with the maximum light around or towards the periphery of the circle, not quite so intense in the center. The size, the only thing I can compare it with is the sun or the moon, and I had said that the size was approximately half to three-quarters of the size of the moon. Its height, well, there again, I haven't anything to compare it with.
There's no cloud on that day.
No, there's no cloud at all. The visibility was about 100 miles. From where we were, we could actually see the other side of the Isle of Wight.
And what about its speed?
Well, I can't give any indication of speed, as I can't give a true idea of the height. The thing is, I can say that the impression was of an object very much higher above us, and therefore, depending on height, would depend on the speed, but truly has a very fantastic speed in roughly the opposite direction.
Thank you very much. Well, flying off the Smythe, can we have your side of the story?
Well, I was rather busy at the time, and I didn't see anything until the pilot told me to look up. And when I looked up, I saw this bright object almost immediately overhead, going in the opposite direction with quite fantastic speed.
And could it have been any sort of meteorological instrument or balloon, in your opinion?
Well, I don't think so. We've gone into this business, we've argued it out amongst ourselves, and we haven't yet arrived at anything conclusive. I don't think it was a Met balloon, we don't think it was another aircraft.
You're pretty used to seeing those.
I've seen quite a few.
Quite a few. Yeah. But what about your conclusions? You say you've drawn none. What did you think about this whole flying saucer story before you came across this one, or this event?
Well, up to this time, I was a confirmed skeptic, but now I think I have an open mind.
You're still open mind?
Just an open mind.
While flying a transport from Keflavik, Iceland to Argentia, Newfoundland, at about 10,000 feet, this was at night, I happened to observe a little bit off of the bow, about 10 or 15 degrees on the water below the horizon, a yellow glow that appeared as though we were approaching a city at night. Since we were over 300 miles from Argentia, I knew that it couldn't be a city, that maybe possibly it were some ships lighted up, and that there were ships in the area that we didn't know about. I asked the navigator, and he said no, there were no ship plots, and that we were not close to land. So I observed it for a while, called it to the attention of Lieutenant Kingdon, who was sitting in the co-pilot seat. He observed it for a while. As we got close, within about 30 or 35 miles, the lights seemed to have a pattern. They were elongated, but it was not a circular type pattern, possibly the length of a couple of ships or two aircraft carriers and the width of two aircraft carriers. After observing this for a while, we got within a range of, say, 30 miles, the lights went out, and all we saw in the water was a small halo. This small halo started its approach towards us, turned to an orange, to a fiery red, to almost a purplish red. And at about 400 or 500 feet below us, it stopped its movement. I had already disengaged the autopilot in order to try to go under this craft, because it looked like we were on collision course. And at that time, I noticed that it was not sitting level. The craft was sitting at an angle, about 45 degrees off the bow, and it was staying with us. So it continued to move with us for a few seconds. And of course, behind me, the additional crew was standing, and they scattered all over the cockpit. A couple were injured. Then it started its movement away from us, and at that time I could tell it was an intelligent craft of some kind, guided. It came up to take a look at us, and then it started its movement away from us. At that time, some other crew members came up and it looked at what we were observing. I put the autopilot back on, set my course, and walked back aft, and Dr. Mosier was sitting back there, and he was a commander in the Navy at the time. And I asked him, I said, "Doc, did you see what we saw?" He says, "Yes." He says it was a flying saucer. I didn't look at it because I don't believe in such things. So at that time, I rushed back to the cockpit, and I told Lieutenant Jones, who had taken my seat, I says, "Al," I says, "whatever you do, don't tell anybody that we saw a flying saucer because they will probably lock us up when we land." So he said, "Well, it's too late," that I had called Gander Control to see if they had anything on the radar. So at that time, we knew that they knew that we had sighted something.
Aviation pioneer Dick Russell's distinguished career includes 26 years as an air safety chairman and 5 years as spokesman for the Airline Pilots Association. He's flown virtually every passenger plane made since the DC-3. In the fall of 1956, Dick Russell was flying as a co-pilot when his flight captain pointed out the window.
And I looked up and I saw an object which was saucer in shape. It was approximately 50 or 60 feet in diameter. I was stunned, and I said, "What is that?" And about that time, it zoomed across in front of my windscreen and stopped, and then flew off at about a 45-degree angle, very high speed. I said, "What in the world was that?" He said, "Well, now you've seen one." And he says, "You can't tell anybody because they think you're nuts."
It goes back to 1953 when a CIA-involved investigation was held. As a result of the extremely heavy wave of sightings in 1952, the CIA and Air Force became so concerned over the sheer number of reports that were tying up American intelligence channels that they wanted to get this signal out of the system, asked the Air Force, the CIA asked the Air Force for a debunking policy. The literal wording was to debunk the flying saucers to decrease public interest in the UFOs. Regulations were promulgated very shortly that made it a crime punishable with, I think it's $10,000 fine and or 10 years in prison to release any information at airbase level.
In the early 1950s, Art Schaaf was flying 7 passengers, including 2 officers, from Eglin Air Force Base in Florida to Louisville, Kentucky, when he had a spectacular sighting. The next day, Schaaf was thoroughly debriefed.
There was a full colonel who was chief of intelligence, and he's the one that called me in. I found out later that everybody was called in that was on that flight. And everybody apparently saw the same thing. Back in those days, when more than one person had a sighting like this, they used mass hallucination as a possible answer to the whole thing.
Schaaf had been the first to notice the strange orange light hovering alongside the plane. He quickly pointed it out to his co-pilot.
Out of nowhere, it's alongside of us. These 3 huge glowing balls in a triangle. And it stayed right with us as we pressed on. And the colonel said, "Art, turn into it." And I said, "Forget it." And he kept it up. So I very gingerly dropped my left wing into this whatever it was, and it just took off like a streak.
Dr. Haines showed us case after case of other pilot sightings, all with minute detail about the encounters.
And he says, "Dr. Haines, you're never going to believe what just happened to me over Lake Michigan." And I said, "Phil, what do you think you saw?" He said, "There's no doubt in my mind that's a vehicle from outer space. Nothing could do what it did. It was as big as a football field," he said. 50,000 people could be on that thing. It was so big. And he showed me, moment by moment, as he's sitting in this position at first, where the object seems to be imaged on the windshield throughout the entire sighting. It disappeared behind the post here. It reappeared. It's a real object. It seemed to be under intelligent control. It had structure to it. They felt a slight shock wave at the nearest point when the object was doing its turn and then going away. By the way, he did not report this case to the authorities. He kept this to himself. One very interesting case I investigated involving a commercial transport flying across the country at night. The captain told me that he was on autopilot flying at cruise altitude and cruise speed when all of a sudden the airplane began to fly by itself to deviate off, I believe, to the left-hand side.
The alarmed pilot noticed that all three of his compasses were pointing to different headings. Then he saw a bright object hovering by his left wing. He observed it for several minutes before it darted off in a flash.
Air traffic control in Boston said, United 94, where are you going? So I said, well, when we figure this out, I'll let you know. Whatever it was, it did cause a disruption in the magnetic field around the aircraft to the point where it did pull the aircraft off course.
The airplane is the focus of attention of the phenomenon for some strange reason, not the other way around.
Later on, I mentioned it to my boss, and he gave me a ration about, well, bad things happen to people that have sightings like that.
Air traffic personnel are pressured into silence as well. This controller, who has tracked UFOs on radar, feels strongly that authorities such as the FAA do more than just discourage the filing of UFO sighting reports. Only on the condition that his identity not be revealed did he agree to talk to us.
Do you think there's actually a system in place to discredit people who might come forward?
Yes. There was one in Fairbanks that the controller saw something up to the north, and he reported it, and they made him look like an idiot. And he said, hey, forget it. I'm dropping the paperwork. I must have been mistaken.
You know, some people who see this might think you're seeing things. What would you say to them?
I know what I saw. And if they would choose to say that it was something different, they weren't there.
It was a Japan Airlines cargo flight piloted by Captain Kenju Terauchi. This is the sketch Terauchi drew of what he says he saw at his window that night. And this Japanese television graphic is based on his description.
This is just a small spacesuit. We can see a big plane. This one is size is carrier, so mothership.
Bigger than an aircraft carrier, Terauchi claimed when he drew this sketch showing the relative size of his jumbo jet. Terauchi's route was over Alaska to Anchorage. He says the UFOs stayed with him 40 minutes and then disappeared. Today, the FAA released tapes of the crew's conversation with controllers.
Japan Air 1628, sir, if you're able to identify the type of aircraft. We cannot identify the type. Still coming, like a formation. It's quite big.
The object began to shadow the aeroplane in the direction of Fairbanks, Alaska. Thanks to the contrast of the city lights, the crew could see the outline of the object. We couldn't believe our eyes. It was 30 to 40 times bigger than a Boeing 707. We tried to shake off this object, and I veered the 707 away. The control tower asked if we required the intervention of a military fighter. We replied that it would be too dangerous, as an El Al aeroplane needed to cross our flight path. Towards 6 p.m., the object disappeared. The sighting lasted for an hour. These are the sketches by Captain Terauchi. Both he and his crew saw an enormous UFO. It was under control, and he felt there was every possibility that it hadn't been constructed on Earth.
My name is John Callahan. I'm a retired FAA employee. I was the division manager for the Accidents Evaluation and Investigation Division in D.C. About 2 years before I retired, I received a call from Alaska region where the region wanted to know what to tell the media. When I questioned, tell the media what, he says about the UFO, and it went downhill from there. What UFO? It turned out I told him what any government employee would do at that time was to tell him it's under investigation. And then I had him send all that data to the FAA's tech center in Atlantic City. The next day, my immediate boss, service director, Javi Safir, and I went to Atlantic City. I had just purchased a new video camera, and I videoed the event. And in Atlantic City, we had them play back on a scope, you would call it a scope, a plan view display, PVD, exactly what the pilot seen or what the controller seen, and we tied that in with the voice tape so we could hear exactly what the controller said and what he heard, and we taped it. We came back the next day, briefed the administrator, Admiral Ingen, on what happened. He wanted a 5-minute briefing. After we started the briefing, he wanted to know if he could see the video. We put the video on. He watched the video, the whole video. The next day, he set up a meeting for me to give a dog and pony show to President Reagan's scientific staff and whoever they brought over, and to hand off all that data to them. That morning in the FAA round room, it was either 9 or 10 o'clock, 3 men from Reagan's scientific staff, 3 CIA people, 3 FBI people, and I don't remember who the other guys were, along with all the FAA experts that I brought with me. They could decide or talk about the hardware and the software, how it worked. We put on a dog and pony show. We let them watch the video. We had all the data there. We had all the printouts that the computer put out. They got all excited over it. When it was all done, the CIA, one of the CIA men told the people they were now sworn to secrecy, that this meeting never happened and this event never happened. When I asked him why, I thought it was probably just a stealth bomber at the time, he says, well, this is the first time that we have recorded radar data on a UFO, and these guys are going to get all excited, drooling over all this data. I said, well, you're going to tell the public about it? And he says, no, we don't tell the public about this. It would panic the public. He says, we're going to go back and study this. I said, okay. It was what he was going to do. Now, I've told this story many times, and I get sometimes funny looks from people. I have with me the voice tapes of the controllers that were involved, the FAA original tapes. See, after we handed this stuff off to the president's staff, the FAA didn't know what to do with it. We don't separate UFOs from real traffic, so it's not our problem. Okay? I have a copy of the original of the video that we took, which is rather interesting. And once the thing was all over, the reports started coming into my office, but because it wasn't an FAA air traffic problem, the FAA's report ended up on a table in my office. And it stayed there until I retired, when one of the staffers packed up all my gear and helped it move to my house. Also, in a box I found just a few days ago, in my 1992 tax return, I have the target printouts from the computer data, which, so if you wanted to return or look at every target that was up there at the time, you can now reproduce this from this piece of paper here. And it's called the UFO incident, Japan 1648, I believe the number was, that happened on November the 18th, 1986. I'm prepared to go to Congress to swear before Congress that everything I've told you people and everything that is here is the truth. Thank you.
The regulations that prohibit pilots talking about UFOs, even civilian pilots, GENUP 146 is a regulation specifically designed to treat objects which are a threat to national security. And yet the Air Force tells the public that UFOs are not a threat to national security. They're the product of hoaxes, hallucinations, and misinterpretations.